Back when we were reading book 12 of Aristotle's Metaphysics, we saw Aristotle give an argument or kind of sketch an argument for the existence of God, for the existence of this unmoved mover, this first cause. We see in the third Meditations, Descartes also give an argument for that same conclusion, for the existence of God at least. He doesn't say anything about unmoved movers or anything like that, but for the existence of God. Though they are both arguing for the same conclusion, their arguments are very different and start in very different places. And indeed, they're so different that they likely would disagree with each other. They likely would think that each other's arguments are no good. Aristotelians, and in fact, historically, this is what has happened. Aristotelians, those who believe in God have claimed, or who think Aristotle's arguments for the existence of God work. They think that Descartes' arguments don't work, that these arguments, that the argument that Descartes gives in the third meditation fails. It doesn't actually establish that God exists. They think that God exists, sure, but that Descartes' argument doesn't establish that or doesn't justify that idea. And on the kind of conversely, Cartesians have tended to argue that the Aristotelian arguments don't work. And you can see why, at least in the context of the Meditations, Descartes is not going to give an Aristotelian style argument for the existence of God, because the Aristotelian argument started from the fact, or from the claim, that there are out there things that exist that are contingent, or to put it in a more, right, Aristotle didn't use that word, things out there are in motion. Well, if they're in motion, they had to be put in motion by something, blah, 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 and going back. Or if they're contingent, there had to be a cause of their existence. And well, what was the cause of their existence? Right? That's the Aristotelian argument. Though both ways of putting the argument rely crucially on this idea that there's stuff out there, right? You see it and it happens. It starts with perception. And so Descartes, at least in the context of the Meditations, at this point in the Meditations, is not going to be able to use an argument like that, because he doesn't know if his perception is justified. We're still operating under this kind of veil of skeptical doubt. And so he's not going to start from perception. What I want to do now, having kind of laid out that there are these differences, and that even though these two kind of groups of philosophers agree on the conclusion that God exists, nonetheless, they disagree fairly radically on what a good reason for that conclusion is. What I want to do now is talk about some of the problems that have been raised for Descartes' third meditation's argument for the existence of God. And there are two main kinds of problems that I want to get to. The first is, I think, maybe a bit less serious than the second, but first we'll go quicker. So the first problem that people have raised for Descartes' argument revolves around this causal principle of ideas. Right? This, and then, like, as I was trying to say, this is really the one of the crucial premises, really makes the argument work. And so the causal principle of ideas states that the cause in an idea must have at least as much intrinsic reality as the idea has representative reality. What's the problem with this claim? Well, I don't know. Is it even true? The cause of an idea must have at least as much intrinsic reality as the idea has representative reality. I mean, that seems, the worry that people have is that it just seems kind of cooked up. It seems just kind of made up by Descartes to make this argument work. It's unclear that it's really even true. And even if it were, is it really evident by the natural light? Descartes claims that this thing is, that it's known by intuition, that we vividly and clearly perceive it. right? It's like 2 + 2 = 4, where you just think about it and boom, true, self-evident. And as we're going to get to a little bit later next week, Descartes this thing has to be known in that way. And if it isn't, it's going to kind of tank his whole project. And so the first problem, if you will, that people raise for this argument is that this causal principle of ideas seems a little suspect. Now, this isn't really a rigorously stated problem. It's just kind of giving voice to a suspicion or worry that you might have, right? I don't know about that causal principle of ideas. I mean, it's hard enough to even understand in its own right. It doesn't ring out as self-evident. It's not like 2 + 2 = 4. I can't even under intrinsic reality. I don't even know what that is. And something like that. And so it's not even clear that it's true. It looks kind of rigged up. I don't know. Suspicious. That's not that strong. You could make that stronger by trying to give a counterexample, say, or something like that. But that in itself really is just a way of giving voice to a worry. It's not really a statement of a rigorous objection. A more serious problem, a more rigorous objection, if you will, concerns the second premise of the argument, or is the second premise as I presented it, this idea of God revolves around this claim that Descartes makes. And in certain ways, you can think of it as a kind of, a kind of counter example, if you will, to this causal principle of ideas. Okay, so people have tried to raise a problem for the way Descartes is invoking the idea of God. So the basic idea behind Descartes' argument is we have this idea, and this idea has so much perfection and reality in it. It's of a thing that's so perfect that it could only have been caused by something that is equally as perfect as it. And the way this objection goes that we're going to look at now is to say, well, no, that idea of God did not need to be caused by something so perfect. And the way we can think about this to motivate this objection, to see why somebody might object in this way, is to consider an analogy, right? So Descartes saying our idea of God has so much perfection that it had to be caused by something with lots and lots and lots of, indeed, infinite perfection. Well, let's consider an analogy. And the idea here is to try to get a little bit clearer on what exactly our idea of God is like. And so we're going to consider an analogy with machines. And in particular, kind of complicated, sophisticated, intricate machines. You might have so there are two ways in which you might have an idea of an intricate machine. Call them A and B. So you might have an idea of an intricate machine, a sophisticated, complicated machine, but not of how it all works, right? Anybody could kind of come up with an idea of a complicated machine, right? And there's just a bunch of wires and gears and all kinds of things, but you have no idea how it works or what it does or anything like that. That's one way in which you might have an idea of an intricate machine. By contrast, you might have an idea of such a machine, but know how it works. And so that would be a B idea of an intricate machine, right? You have an idea of it, of the machine as a whole and how it's an intricate machine, but you know how it would work. So yeah, there's a wire that goes from there to there because that's doing blah, 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 blah. And there's gears here because it does this and that, right? Understanding how exactly the machine works. So for instance, you might have two different people, one of them not as intelligent, if you will, as the other, right? An A idea can be thought of by anybody. So in this example, right, somebody might think of the intricate machine being thought of would be something like a nuclear power plant. And look, any of us could think of that. even the most dim-witted of us could come up with an idea like that, right? You just think of like a nuclear power plant, and there's like a nuclear core, and I don't know how it works, and I don't know how everything's connected, but it's a nuclear power plant. It's a very intricate machine, so to speak, intricate, complicated thing. Not too impressive to come up with an idea like that. Anybody can kind of come up with an idea like that. By contrast, to come up with a B idea of a machine, that's hard, right? You need to be really smart, or you need to have studied physics or mechanics or engineering or something for a really long time, right? So someone like Einstein could come up with an idea of, say, a nuclear power plant or something, but not just this kind of general, vague, fuzzy idea, but actually an idea where he understands how it all works, how all the parts function together, right? And so that would be an idea of an intricate machine that includes an idea of all the intricacies within that machine, right? So how all the things are related to each other. Now, it seems like A ideas don't need to be caused by something with a lot of intrinsic perfection. They don't require, to put the point more intuitively, they don't require any great cause. Anybody can think of whatever, an intricate machine without knowing how it works or whatever, right? Even the most dim-witted among us. By contrast, a B idea, right? That requires a lot of perfection, so to speak. You need to have a PhD in physics or whatever, or be a genius or something, right? You need to have studied physics for a really long time to come up with a B kind of idea, right? So B ideas seem to require a lot of perfection. They seem to require some special kind of cause, whereas A ideas, right, don't. Anybody can think of an A idea. They don't require any kind of special training, any kind of particular perfection or whatever to come up with. And so now the question is, our idea of God, of this thing that has infinite perfection, of infinite representative reality, what kind of idea is it? Is it more like A, or is it more like B? Is our idea of God more like an idea of something that's really great and amazing, though we don't really understand exactly how it works? Or is it of something that's really great and amazing and we understand entirely how it works? Because the idea would be, if our idea of God is like a B idea, well, yeah, that might require then God as its cause. If we understand, if our idea of God includes this kind of total understanding of how exactly God works, of the understanding of the essence of God and God's ways and everything about God, well, yeah, the only person who could have caused that idea might very well be God. That requires a lot of perfection to cause. But if our idea of God is kind of vague and fuzzy, and we don't really understand how it all works, and it's kind of, I don't know, it's just this thing, then it's more like an A idea. But then it doesn't seem to require very much perfection to cause. It doesn't seem like it would require God to cause it. And so which one is our idea of God like? And Descartes is fairly clear about this. Our idea of God is more like an A idea, right? He obviously doesn't call it an A idea or whatever. He doesn't talk about intricate machines. This is an analogy that other people have raised. But he says things, and this is kind of part of the theistic tradition of which he is a part. But, you know, he'll say things like, we don't really understand God fully, right? God is kind of a full understanding of God is beyond our abilities, beyond our mind's ability. And so, no, we don't really understand how exactly God works. We don't understand how it all hangs together or what exactly God's ways are. There are certain things that to us mere mortals are kind of inexplicable about God. We can say a little bit about them, but we don't have a full and complete understanding of them, right? This is the kind of thing that Descartes says, and this is a very kind of common idea that you find within as I was saying, the theistic tradition of which Descartes is a part, right? You find this within Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, this idea that we can say some things about God, but we don't really understand God's essence. We can't fully grasp and understand God. Well, that makes our idea of God then seem like an A idea, right? And A ideas don't, like intuitive at least, they don't really seem to require any great cause. Anybody can think of an idea like that, right? I can think of a nuclear power plant. I don't understand how it works, but I can make that idea up. It doesn't require any great perfection. I've never really studied advanced physics or anything like that, right? It's only B ideas that require, intuitively, it's only B ideas that require great causes, so to speak. And so if our idea of God is actually more similar to an A idea than a B idea, well, this would be a sign that our idea of God doesn't, in fact, require God as its cause, that we could have thought it up, or we could have derived it from something else, or whatever, right? And so this would be a way of, or objecting to Descartes' argument of showing, or of attempting to show, that the mere fact that we have an idea of God is not sufficient to show that God exists. Why? Because even though that idea of God is of an infinitely perfect being, say, that idea is, in as much as we don't understand really how that infinite perfection works, that idea didn't require an infinitely perfect cause. It could have been caused by ourselves. We could have come up with it ourselves, or it could have been caused by something else, right? And so this is perhaps the most common or kind of pointed, rigorous criticism of Descartes' argument for the existence of God.